Hello and welcome to this evening's debate. My name is Steve Johnson. I'm the director of the Seawolf Debate program here at UAA, and I'm very happy to be partnering with the Anchorage Daily News to produce these debates under the Arguing Alaska banner. The Arguing Alaska series is a number of debates that we've produced over the past to focus on issues of interest to Alaskans, and we think that the ballot measure that we'll be debating tonight is certainly one of those things. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the topic that we'll be debating and then the format in which we're going to debate it. I'll introduce our debaters on both sides as well as our journalists who are with us here tonight, and then we'll get to the actual arguments themselves. The topic for tonight's debate is Alaskans will benefit from passing the Alaska Top 4 Ranked Choice Voting and Campaign Finance Laws Ballot Initiative. Our elections have received a great deal of attention lately, and not just for the outcomes that they produce. Gerrymandering, voter registration, mail-in ballots, and election fraud have become topics of our political conversation in ways that we haven't seen since our national obsession with hanging chads. This attention has become even more pronounced recently when our August primaries here in Alaska ended the careers of some longtime legislators. There's good reason for all this attention to how our elections are run. A republic that claims to represent the will of its people is legitimate only insofar as that will is clearly expressed through our voting. Fairness in our election process is an absolute. Without confidence in the rules of the game, the voters, and their representatives alike, quickly begin to doubt the legitimacy of the system. It's for this reason that ballot measures like the one under consideration tonight demand our scrutiny. The measure's official title is An Act Replacing the Political Party Primary with an Open Primary System and Ranked Choice General Election, and requiring additional campaign finance disclosures. Though somewhat wordy, the premise of the measure is actually quite simple. Rather than relying on partisan primaries to select candidates on which the general electorate votes, candidates would proceed through an open primary in which all candidates, regardless of their party affiliation, would appear on everyone's ballot. The 4 candidates receiving the most votes in the primary would proceed to the general election, where ranked choice voting would determine the winner. According to the official language that will appear on the November ballot, ranked choice voting works like this. Voters would have the option to rank candidates in order of choice. Voters would rank their first choice as number 1, the second choice candidate as number 2, and so on. Voters' number 1 choice would be counted first. If no candidate received a majority after counting the first ranked votes, then the candidate with the least amount of first votes would be removed from the counting. Those ballots that ranked the removed candidate as first would then be counted for the voter's second ranked candidate. This process would repeat until one candidate received a majority of the remaining votes. If voters still want to choose only one candidate, they can. While the approach advocated by the measure is relatively new to the United States, it's in place in a number of Western liberal democracies, including Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, and Scotland. In addition to introducing ranked choice voting, Ballot Measure 2 would also make changes to our campaign finance laws. Again, according to the official ballot language, this act would also require additional disclosures for contributions to independent expenditure groups and relating to the sources of contributions. It would also require a disclaimer on paid election communications by independent expenditure groups funded by a majority of out-of-state money. This, then, is the measure that we'll debate when contemplating the motion, Alaskans will benefit from passing the Alaska Top 4 Ranked Choice Voting and Campaign Finance Ballot Initiative. We'll interrogate this motion in a debate organized in 3 phases. In the first phase, each of the advocates will offer a series of speeches to develop their cases for and against the motion. We'll begin by hearing from the proposition, and then alternate between a proposition and opposition speaker until each have had one 8-minute opportunity to make their case. In the second phase of the debate, we'll open the floor to questions posed by journalists from the Anchorage Daily News. I'll moderate that section to make sure that each side gets a fair shot at responding to the questions. In the third and final phase of the debate, we'll provide each team one 4-minute opportunity to provide a summary speech in close of their position. In this phase, the opposition will speak first, and the proposition will have the last word. And it's worth noting that there's a reason for that order of speeches being reversed in the final summary speech phase of the debate. When a change is proposed to the status quo, as this policy represents, it's the burden of proof for those to propose it to demonstrate that there's a good reason to enact that change. Those who oppose such measures enjoy what's called the presumption of certainty in knowing that the current status quo works the way we expect it to. To offset that burden of proof, then, we offer those who are proposing the change the opportunity both to open the debate and to close the debate. With that all in place, I'd like to now introduce our debaters for the evening. Speaking on behalf of the pro side are Scott Kendall and Lesil McGuire. Scott Kendall serves as the counsel to the Yes on 2 for Better Elections campaign. Scott is an attorney at Holmes, Weddell, and Barkett, and most recently served as chief of staff to then Governor Bill Walker. For decades, Scott has worked all across Alaska in a variety of legal, political, and consulting roles. He and his wife, Selena Hopkins Kendall, raised their 2 children in Anchorage. Lesil McGuire received her undergraduate degree from Willamette University, and following her undergraduate studies, went on to work in Washington, D.C. for 2 years as a legislative and press aide for the U.S. Senator Ted Stevens. She subsequently obtained her Juris Doctorate from Willamette University College of Law and came back to Alaska to work for the firm of Birch, Horton, Bittner, and Sherratt in the corporate division. Lesil also served 16 years in the Alaska State Legislature, first elected to the House at age 29, and then serving 10 years as a senator. Representing the con side in today's debate are Brett Huber and Leighan Gonzales. Brett is a lifelong outdoors enthusiast who came to Alaska 36 years ago. Once here, he's had the privilege to work and live throughout our great state. Over the years, he's been a fishing guide in the Bristol Bay, Iliamna, and South Central Alaskan regions, a small business owner in King Salmon and Talkeetna. He ran a statewide nonprofit in Soldotna and was first introduced to state politics in 1994 in the Mat-Su Valley. In addition to working for both the legislature and the state, Brett became a community activist and involved participant in many issues facing and affecting Alaskans. Most recently, he managed the governor's successful statewide election and then joined the executive branch as the governor's director of both policy and communications. 1 month ago, Brett stepped away from that position to focus his attention on protection of our most basic constitutional rights by organizing a statewide campaign to defeat Ballot Measure 2. Leighan Gonzales is the chair of Protect Our Elections No on 2, a grassroots coalition of working Alaskans. A student in UAA's Justice Department, Leighan also works at the Alaska Innocence Project. She was born and raised in East Anchorage to young parents who worked multiple jobs to make their way through school while raising their children. Leighan is the proud product of our public education system and spent her childhood benefiting from federally funded social service programs for low-income households. Her family relied on Denali Kid Care coverage when, as an infant, she had a risky and expensive open-heart surgery to repair a congenital birth defect. This inspired her lifelong fight for affordable, quality health care for Alaskans, just as her early years instilled in her a passion for justice and inspired her to campaign against special interests who seek to derail the programs and progress that made her who she is. The 2 journalists with us tonight include James Brooks and Tom Hewitt. James is a statewide reporter for the Anchorage Daily News. He came to the ADN in 2018 after working for the Juneau Daily Empire and Kodiak Daily Mirror and the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. Tom Hewitt is the opinion editor for the Anchorage Daily News. Born and raised in Fairbanks, he formerly worked as an opinion editor at the Fairbanks Daily News Miner and also as a reporter and news director at Fairbanks' 2 local news stations. So I have no doubt that with all those terrific participants, we'll have an informative debate tonight. With that, then, I'd like to call the debate to order and ask the pro side to speak for 8 minutes on behalf of the motion. Here.
Good evening, Alaskans that are watching here tonight. Ballot Measure 2 deserves your vote. It will lead to better transparency, more participation, increased access, more choice for you as Alaskans, that in turn will lead to more cooperation among those you elect, better solutions and outcomes with broader conversations, and a better Alaska for our children and grandchildren. I first ran for office in the year 2000. Much has changed over these past 20 years since I first served. Like many Alaskans, I feel I was raised by Ted Stevens when it came to my political values, my ethos and vision for the state that I love. I felt then, and I still feel now, there is nothing that Alaskans cannot accomplish without grit, community, and vision. With that said, we face more obstacles than ever today. We're facing down years of partisan gridlock in Juneau, economic recession, COVID-19, and the type of political infighting that is embarrassing. And I'm glad Uncle Ted and other founders are not here to see. I want us to pause here for a moment and imagine a future that not only discourages that kind of gridlock, infighting, and partisan rhetoric, but expects candidates and voters alike to rise above and achieve high levels of progress and effectiveness for the sake of the state, all of its people, future generations, and current. That's the Alaska that I was raised in, to believe in, to fight for, and that's why I'm engaged in this debate. As someone who has served in the legislature and strongly believes in it, I'm typically opposed to ballot measures. There have been a couple I've supported, but I found them to be rather blunt instruments. The kind of discussion and debate that goes on in the committee process is actually fairly good and thorough. But in this case, I believe ballot measure 2 is necessary. I don't think the legislature will change it itself, and I think it's time for this change. Unelected political parties and their leaders who meet behind closed doors, not in the presence of Alaskan voters, dark money groups, and others have grown more and more influential and are dictating the outcomes of Alaskans' choices. We need a message from the people of Alaska and a result that will drive home reform and bring the power back to the people. Ballot measure 2 can do that. The changes to our electoral system have come in response to court decisions that I personally oversaw when I was chair of the Judiciary Committee in the early 2000s. They came from an outside court at the Supreme Court in a Scalia-led decision with an interpretation that I believe was actually wrong, that caused political parties in the state of Alaska to have the right to decide whether they would close their primaries. So imagine my service. I started out under the open primary system that Alaska has had for all those years, and then early in my political career was forced then to campaign and enter a very closed political process. My observation of that political process is that it has led to more partisan elections. It has excluded average Alaskans. It's actually led candidates into a different way of running. When I first started running, candidates felt the need to knock on all of the doors, or the majority of the doors, of supervoters at a minimum. And now what you find are candidates who only knock on the doors of those that bear the same political party after their name. I think that it's caused voter atrophy. I think carried out to its logical extreme, you are going to see the kind of results that you saw in the most recent primary begin to erode and erode to the point where I think we'll have fewer than 1,000 people on average in each of the districts electing those that come forward. Ballot measure 2 is not a perfect solution, but it's sure better than what we have. And it's working in a lot of places. In the last 10 years, ranked choice voting, which had been tried early in the progressive era, is returning with success. It provides us 3 common sense reforms that give we, the voters, something that special interests and political party bosses have seriously diminished in recent years: our voice, our choice, and our power back through our votes. Ballot measure 2 will open the primary elections by going from the current 2-ballot closed party system, where a voter, an Alaskan, has to walk in and reveal even who they would vote for by virtue of being asked which ballot it is they would take. Only then can they go behind the closed door to express their private position, voting for the person of their choice. Why is this important? In Alaska, 63% of registered voters choose not to register in an organized party of Republican or Democrat. Ballot measure 2 simply opens the primaries to afford the 63% of Alaskans the chance to vote for the person of their choice. And often they may end up voting for a person that has a D or an R behind their name, even in the same election. That's very common for Alaskans. Our opponents argue that the current system is fair because these voters get to choose between ballots and that they still have choice. We all know, those of you watching, that that's not meaningful choice. I've heard from so many of you over the last 16 years, the invasion of privacy you feel, and the invasion of choice that you feel not being able to have one ballot with all the Alaskans on it and the trust that you should have to be able to vote. Ballot Measure 2 also goes on to create what's called ranked choice voting. This is the part of the ballot measure I've received the most questions about, and I'd like to ask anyone out there watching to please contact Alaskans for Better Elections. Contact me personally, Scott, any of our team. I'll come to your house and sit down and explain it to you. It's actually quite simple. Instead of the 2 ballots that we talked about, all of the names of the people, of the Alaskans who have come around and are having conversations with you asking for your vote will be on that ballot. It provides a system where voters can rank or not rank. I've also had that question. If you'd like to simply vote for 1, you can. If you'd like for 2, you can. If you'd like to rank every one of them on there, you can. If your first choice comes in last and no one reaches 50%, then the vote goes to the next preference. The hope and the usual way that it works is that that first ranked choice tends to be the majority winner. In states and communities that have tried it all over the United States, there is broad public support and satisfaction and a feeling of empowerment. The League of Women Voters in Washington has found that it enables a broader number of people to have their votes counted by giving them initial choices. It preserves majority rule, but encourages more participation and diversity. The Sightline Analyst Institute, a policy think tank with an office in Alaska, found that ranked choice ballots are one of the most powerful tools available. Finally, it would eliminate dark money. This is something that over 81% of Alaskan voters agree on. Dark money is the funding that comes from PACs, super PACs, into the millions of each election cycle. Alaskans have no way of knowing what these true sources are. Anonymous campaign spending is swaying voters, and Alaskans are simply sick of it. Let's get back to a more open, transparent system that allows Alaskans the privacy and freedom guaranteed to vote for the Alaskan of their choice without middlemen and middlewomen in the form of party leaders and outside corporate interests to interfere. We're an independent, free-thinking, rugged, and curious people. Let's open up the process again and shine light in on it so that we get more choices, more voices, and better outcomes for this incredible state we all love.
Thank you. Thank you for the organizers of the debate as well as the other participants. And most of all, thank you Alaskans who are paying attention and becoming informed on this issue. Ballot Measure 2 is a 25-page, 74-section proposal being promoted by out-of-state billionaires. In fact, over 99% of ABE's funding is from out-of-state. This initiative cobbles together 2 failed election experiments from the lower 48 and tries to impose this tangled mess on Alaskan voters. So-called ranked choice voting requires voters to assign a score to every candidate the ballot or risk having their ballot thrown out. The California-style jungle primary would be imposed on Alaska voters and robbing Alaskans of their ability to select political party nominees to compete other candidates in the general election. We have no closed primaries in Alaska. We have an open primary and a classic open primary. The 63% of non-affiliated can select either ballot to participate in. All Alaskans see all the choices in a general election ballot. The slick consultants and billionaires hired to sell Ballot Measure 2 will tell you that they're fixing flaws in Alaskans' traditional time-honored election method. But as we'll discuss, Alaskans don't have the problems they claim, and Ballot Measure 2 doesn't fix the problems they've invented. Our system's been in place for nearly 250 years. It's normal, typical, and easily understood by voters. Their radical substitute is rare, unusual, complicated, and jam-packed with problems. Ranked choice voting is unfair, it's undemocratic, and it's not needed. Unlike our simple and transparent one Alaska, one vote system, some votes may count many times and some not at all. It's a confusing voter computer algorithm that's going to decide a winner, and the guy or lady with the most votes doesn't always win. In fact, it's oftentimes the second or third place finish. That's like taking an Olympic gold medal and rewarding it to the man or woman that came in third. And now we're talking about electing our leaders. There are several glaring unconstitutional problems with this ballot initiative and the way it's written. I'm just going to use the light governor and governor candidates and the language that exists in the Constitution and the ballot measure. So under the ballot measure, only the gubernatorial candidate would select their running mate. We talk about more choice, yet there's one person making that choice who's excluded every other Alaskan voter in that process. It suppresses, this has been tried in about 20 jurisdictions across the country. It's already been repealed in Burlington, Vermont, Aspen, Colorado, Pierce County, Washington, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and all throughout North Carolina. Efforts are underway to repeal it in Maine, the only state that's adopted this system for use in statewide elections. This system suppresses voter turnout and fails to reduce polarization. Jason McDaniel of San Francisco University writes, ranked choice voting increased disparities in turnout between groups who are more likely to vote and those who are less likely to vote. Increased disparity. What's the reason? Why are people not participating in ranked choice voting? Why is it not working? Why are voters being disenfranchised and less affluent citizens not showing up? There's 3 reasons. Ballot exhaustion, added complexity, and no surety that their vote will count towards the outcome. Ballot exhaustion. The proponents will claim you only need to vote for one candidate. True, we've never denied this. But even if your one chosen candidate wins in round 1, everyone else to continue to have their vote counted in the computerized instant runoff while your vote sits and waits. After the first round, it's as if you've never voted. If you select one candidate and it's not the winner, and you've not selected a second candidate, your ballot is considered exhausted and set to the side. We should be making, how big a problem is ballot exhaustion? In San Francisco, despite having used ranked choice voting since 2004, 27% of the voters effectively cast no vote in the 2011 mayoral campaign because of exhausted ballots. Nearly 3 in 10 votes that didn't count to the outcome. We should be making voting simpler, not harder. Complexity, lack of surety, and reduced value of their vote will not increase turnout. It has not in the locales that have tried this rank experiment. Look at the numbers. Just saying it doesn't make it so. This is not an Alaskan solution. It's not even an Alaskan idea. People have been absent in this process. No legislative hearings, no public participation. This effort appears to have begun with a couple of disgruntled politicians who failed to win election and a couple of crafty political operatives. This measure is nearly funded entirely by a band of billionaire bandits from several time zones away. The total contribution from Alaskans is nothing more than a rounding error. They're spending millions in dark money to scare you with dark money and exempting themselves from the rules. We believe that just to be the ultimate in hypocrisy, exempting it from the rules. Ballot measures would not come under the rules that they're suggesting for individual candidates. What do these out-of-state billionaires want, and who are they? 3 main billionaire bandits funding Ballot Measure 2 are led by New Yorker Catherine Murdoch, Enron executive John Arnold of Texas, and Riot Games mogul Mark Merrill of California. Google them and decide if these are the folks we Alaskans want deciding who we vote for. And what do these billionaires want? Proponents have described as venture capitalists. They came up with a great idea and sought venture capitalists to fund it. Venture capitalists expect to get paid, and they expect to get paid well. What are these billionaires expecting in exchange? When the proponents say Ballot Measure 2 is needed to save candidates who do the right thing, remember that they mean the right thing according to the Ballot Measure 2 band of outside billionaires, not Alaskans. These billionaires are doing the same thing across the country, doing the same thing in smaller states like North Dakota and Maine, where it's cheap to buy elections thanks to low populations. The proponents would have you believe they wrote this bill just for Alaska. Not true. You can see the same language in Maine, Massachusetts, and now Alaska. It's a cut and paste job from model legislation written by the national group. The language is clear. This measure has been kicked off the ballot in 2 states, North Dakota and Arkansas, because they didn't show petition signers the text. How many Alaskans have read these 25 pages? Seems to be a pattern. We believe this, again, is not fair, not democratic, and not needed. The problems the proponents claim to be fixing don't exist in Alaska. They talk about access to the ballots for the candidates and for individual or smaller parties, while at the same time robbing that access. Alaska is one of the easiest states in the nation to get on the general election ballot. Ranked choice voting would take that away. Requirements start at 50 signatures. There are no closed primaries in Alaska. There's an open and a classic open primary. Undeclared and nonpartisan voters can select whatever ballot they wish. Do we sometimes need to elect better candidates? Yes. Do we need a band of billionaires to buy our elected officials for us by rigging our elections? No. People of all political parties oppose ranked choice voting, and we believe we're in good company in our opposition to this ballot measure. Former Governor Sean Parnell and former Senator Mark Begich have called ranked choice voting political trickery, and they oppose this measure. Former Lieutenant Governor Meade Treadwell noted it would totally confuse the process. The Kansas ACLU said ranked choice voting exacerbates economic and racial disparities. The NAACP supported repeal, saying it's not working. Even California Governor Gavin Newsom called ranked choice voting a false promise that doesn't lead to a better democracy. This system would require Alaskans to cast a vote for candidates they disagree with. No more champions of your most important issue, be that education, be that gun rights, be that homelessness, jobs, whatever. Instead, we'll have the least objectionable candidate that's taken no position on the issues as a winner, comprised of the contrived majority. That candidate that says the least and smiles the most. If this passes, I fear a race to mediocrity that will grind on in perpetuity. Alaskans deserve better.
Thank you. Scott Kendall on behalf of Yes on 2 for Better Elections. Mr. Huber and the other opponents of this ballot measure say the current system works great. Works for who? It works for political insiders and special interests. Over 2/3 of Alaskans believe the state's on the wrong track, and a similar number of Americans believe the same about our nation. Over 60% of Alaskans are not affiliated with either major party, and the status quo shuts out the voices of a majority of Alaskans and punishes statesmanship and rewards division. One of our founding fathers, John Adams, said the greatest evil he could imagine in our nation is if two great political parties come to dominate our political system. His vision has come to pass. The first president of our country, George Washington, used his entire farewell address to warn about the dangers of partisanship and putting partisanship before patriotism. Our opponents have no better ideas, and so they will simply seek to scare you about any change at all. I'll take a few of their arguments in order. First, to discuss ranked choice voting. There is no computer algorithm. There's no hidden, there's no smoke and mirrors. Think of it as simply as there's 3 stacks of ballots for 3 candidates. And every one of them, these voters have ranked the candidates. You simply take the stack of ballots for the candidate who got the least votes, and you look at those ballots and see what their second choice is, and you put them in the other 2 stacks. It's simple, it's transparent, it's auditable, and it's absolutely secure. It does not violate one person, one vote. It treats all voters equally in giving every voter the option to rank other candidates. Not only is that logically true, it's true in a matter of a court of law. Judges appointed by Obama, Bush, and Trump have all upheld ranked choice voting as not violating one person, one vote, and so has the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. There is no effort, there's a discussion of whether in Maine the voters are not happy with the system. In fact, the Maine League of Women Voters polled Mainers after they voted under ranked choice voting. 92% of them found it a good, positive experience with ranked choice voting. And the legislature has repeatedly attempted to repeal ranked choice voting, and the people, through a people's veto, has repeatedly pushed back and said, no, we will keep this power for ourselves. Our opponents rely on old studies and studies that don't apply to attack this measure. They talk about the NAACP being against it. They were against another different system that required voters to rank 10, 12, even 15 candidates, not a system like ours that would narrow the choices down to just 4. Even better, Mr. Huber has repeatedly cited Professor Jason McDaniel, again and again, that he has a study that says ranked choice voting is bad for democracy. We reached out to Professor McDaniel, and he said, the system you're proposing is totally different. It's very different from the kind of RCV elections I studied. You have a primary election. I've studied elections that have a multiplicity of candidates. Yours has a partisan information available on the ballot. Mine did not. It's totally inappropriate to apply my study to this ballot measure. So again, no good ideas, no fresh ideas, no idea to improve Alaskans' lives, just attacks and scare tactics. The constitutionality, the the Constitution of Alaska says that the governor of Alaska shall be elected with the greatest number of votes. Our ballot measure says the winning candidate shall have the greatest number of votes. Now, Mr. Huber may not be an attorney, but I would say I've faced many attorneys, and if you can tell me greatest doesn't mean greatest, then maybe you should have gone to law school. Talking about top 4 open primaries, Mr. Huber has stated we have open primaries. We do not. Tell that to the Alaskans who were shut out of the system, were artificially forced to pick one of 2 ballots when they didn't wish to. They couldn't choose the candidates of their choice. And right now we ask candidates to go down to Juneau, to work across lines, to solve problems, to work with people from the other party, because that's necessary. When you have things like the 3/4 vote and you have bigger compromises, you have to reach across the aisle. Then we expect those candidates to go home and somehow fit through the eye of a needle in a partisan primary where if they've so much as smiled at someone from the other party, they'll get primaried and taken out. Senator Coghill, his political career was ended by 5.9% of his constituents voting against him. Alaskans should ask themselves whether the results like those are democratic. The other 96% of the voters in his district will not see him on the general election ballot. This measure also in the top 4 open primary provides a clear path to small parties to appear, be on the ballot, and not be pushed off or marginalized for being a spoiler, but rather bring their very real issues to the election. And finally, I want to touch on the dark money. Mr. Huber's presentation primarily centers on, do you know who's giving to them? Yes, you do, and do you know why? Because this ballot measure has taken the unprecedented step of not just reporting the political groups who have donated to our campaign. We have pierced through that veil and said, whoever gave to those groups, we want to disclose their names. We have disclosed them on our website because we're not ashamed of it. Mr. Huber's group, on the other hand, has taken dark money. That's the dirty little secret. Most of his money has come from out of state. And furthermore, it's come from a dark money organization called the RLSC that actually dropped close to $250,000 into our primaries. Dark money is being spent to protect dark money. We think it's got to stop. And all we're saying with respect to dark money is, because of the Citizens United decision, we can't stop your money from going into our elections. But if you're going to send a message to Alaskans and try to influence their vote, we're going to know your name. It's that simple, and it's what Alaskans are entitled to. So in closing, I would say the legislature had its chance to pass this bill. This bill was filed before the session. They didn't have a single hearing on it. They could have passed it. We wouldn't be having this discussion right now. They failed to do so, and so it's the people's right to decide whether they want to empower themselves and make these changes to law. The Nonpartisan League of Women Voters of Alaska, the League of Women Voters, nonpartisan, the gold standard of election policy, has endorsed Ballot Measure 2. They are telling all Alaskans to vote for Ballot Measure 2 because they know it will result in a system that's more representative and more fair and more transparent than what we have today. These changes will improve our system because Alaskans have a fundamental right to vote for any candidate they want in any primary. If the state's going to run an election, every Alaskan has a right to choose any candidate they wish. Alaskans have a fundamental right to require that candidates win by convincing a majority of them that their vision is correct for the state. And Alaskans have an absolute right to know who is spending money to influence their vote. Mr. Huber's talked about a race to mediocrity. What we're proposing is a race to statesmanship, where people work together to solve the big problems Alaska has, instead of getting reelected over and over while pointing at the other side and blaming them for failing. We encourage you to vote yes on 2 for more voice, more choice, and more power for all Alaska voters. Thank you.
That's a lot of pages. Hi, my name is Leighan Gonzales, and I am the chair of Protect Our Elections, No on 2, the group that Alaskans for Better Elections likes to ignore and deny that we exist. We actually founded before Brett Huber's group did. We got rolling a couple months ago, but we're ignored all the time, and I don't know why, Scott, you forget about me. It's really sad. Anyway, we're a grassroots coalition of working Alaskans, primarily women, who are volunteering our time to defeat Proposition 2. And I'm here tonight because I believe in people and not politics. I'm here because I believe in Alaskans and not Texas billionaires. The group behind the measure is campaigning to overhaul Alaska's election systems to benefit candidates who have historically been unable to successfully campaign in a manner convincing Alaskans to elect them with the high standards that we have now. This measure rigs our system so candidates who don't represent all of us can win, instead of simply working harder to win the support of Alaskan voters like us. When I graduated from East High School in 2013, I was at the most diverse high school in the country. East High was the top. I believe Bartlett was second, West High was third. We had this beautiful multiculturalism, and I would love for my local representation to reflect that multiculturalism of my graduating class. But if Prop 2 passes, comprehensive representation of diversity, diversity of opinion, diversity of socioeconomic status, it will not be possible in this state. So we go back to the fact that it's people and not politics. It's people and not parties. We're having currently a David and Goliath type fight with people like me, average Alaskans, fighting against $5 million from Texas billionaires, from New York billionaires, from California billionaires, from billionaires I had to Google because I didn't even understand their names. I initially got involved in this ballot measure opposition by researching Alaskans for Better Elections on their website. They listed all of their APOC reports in a show of transparency. They wanted to gift to us as Alaskans all of these reports. So I looked through all of their APOC reports, and I looked through all of the groups that are sponsoring them and that have dumped millions of dollars from outside into their campaign. And then I went on to the Federal Elections Commission website, and I looked at who their donors were. And I actually had to write down a couple names because I didn't recognize them. So we have from Unite America, which is based out of Colorado. It's mainly white millionaires and billionaires who are men. We see Christy Walton, who's an heiress of the Walton, the Walmart family fortune. Not sure what that's doing up here in Alaska. She was listed as the richest woman in the world by Forbes for several years in a row, and she wants to play with Alaskan elections. We have Dirk and Tasha Ziff, who is a billionaire couple who inherited a family fortune. They inherited billions, and yet they still want to play with our elections that average Alaskans understand. We also have Seth Klarman, a billionaire hedge fund manager, Scott Ciprell, a Republican candidate from New Jersey who lost with the system that New Jersey has. So why are these people trying to change our elections? Why is the Action Now initiative based out of Texas and funded primarily by John Arnold of Texas, who was embroiled in the Enron scandal as a hedge fund manager? Why is he dumping millions of dollars into Alaskan elections to change Alaskan elections, to change Alaskan legislators? We see that he has dumped $28 million to roll back benefits for public workers in California, essentially asking them to give away their benefits, to give away their hard-earned pensions, and give them to a hedge fund manager. Is that something we want for Alaska and for Alaska's hard-working public sector workers? I don't think so, and it's not something I want to be behind. Not only was he behind that, but he was embroiled in a controversial program in Baltimore where he funded military surveillance hardware that the ACLU claimed as an unconstitutional infringement of privacy. So we have infringements of privacy, we have the ACLU working against him, we have the NAACP saying that ranked choice voting disenfranchises voters and candidates of color. We don't want to do that. To hit back on a couple points. So when every individual Alaskan is registered to vote by default, you're not affiliated with a party because you're defaulted in. So claiming this 60% number is not really an accurate total of people who are engaged and people who are voting, because the people who show up to vote, maybe that's a different number from 60% of Alaskans who are just automatically registered to vote. My points about billionaires, outside billionaires, being so bad for Alaska are so compelling. Their chair, Jason Gren, has been plagiarizing me online to confuse Alaskans. So I'll take that as a compliment. And Scott Kendall and Jason Gren have been saying this whole time they're really proud to have the support of the groups that are donating and volunteering and helping them out. But what Scott Kendall fails to mention is the amount of money that they're directly paying him per month to trick Alaskans. And last time I checked, it was about $10,000 a month, maybe more, maybe less. I'll check the next report. And so another point, I wonder why this organization of typically men condescending us Alaskans on how to run and win campaigns in Alaska are saying that women and communities of color and communities of disenfranchised people of lower socioeconomic statuses, why are they saying that we need this to be able to be successful in our Alaskan political system? That doesn't really sound correct. It sounds like they're imposing their choices on us. They're imposing their choice and their voice and taking ours away. Their website itself, it's flashy, it's vague, it's gorgeous, it's well designed, and when you've got $5 million, it's easy to do. But they don't actually include the whole initiative on their website. They don't even include a sectional analysis. I've read all 25 pages of this, and it's confusing, and it's complicated, and it does a whole lot more than just 3 things. There's actually 8 points to the measure that it changes, but a lot of it just doesn't make sense. So when George Washington stepped aside to allow others to use the system he helped create, he moved aside so people can make it better. And I don't think he would support something like this that would disenfranchise voters, that would disenfranchise voices, and that would take away our rights as Alaskans to choose. We would lose our champions for choice. We would lose our candidates who stand up for us, and we will elect people who just hide in the corner and don't take stances and don't say anything until they're elected. And once they're elected, if this passes, they'll quietly pull back our rights. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you will join me in either reading this ballot measure, and if you don't want to read the measure, it's tough, you will vote no on Proposition 2. Thank you.
So you've had the chance to hear the arguments from the pro and the con sides about this ballot measure. We're going to take this opportunity now to take a little break in the debate and give our journalists from the Anchorage Daily News the opportunity to ask some questions of both sides based upon the arguments that they've heard here tonight. So Tom and James, I've talked to both of you. I know that Tom was planning to go first, so I'll turn it over to you, Tom. What would you like to ask?
I've got a question for the pro side. The 3 pieces of this measure each do different things, and they look pretty complex at first blush. Not everyone will have watched this debate or engaged with the news coverage. How do you expect you'll be able to overcome the impulse by many of those voters to say, I understand our current system and that's good enough?
A really easy answer to that would be read the ballot language. It's 3 simple paragraphs that explain the 3 different choices. Of course, the Attorney General Clarkson, who attempted to keep us off the ballot, although he attempted to keep us off the ballot, he wrote this ballot description, which is clear and straightforward. And my 4th grader and my 8th grader can read it and understand it quite well. And what we've seen when we've polled, and we released a poll just a couple days ago, was that by a measure of 59% to 15%, when just reading the language on the ballot, Alaskans vote yes. So my answer to that is the proof's in the pudding. Can Alaskans read the language and understand what it does? Yes. Do they support it once they read it? Yes.
So Lesil, I saw you raise your hand when that question came out.
Well,
Anything you'd like to add to that?
and I think it goes back to continuing the outreach, as I did tonight, making it clear to Alaskans that would like some additional time to talk about it, to be able to do it. But I have had the same experience as Scott, that there's zero exception with a range of ages and range of experience of life, if you will, out there that I've talked to, where I walk through it and they get it. At first, there's no question that the ranked choice voting, they want to understand a little bit, but once you walk through it, I think they get it. Here's what I know Alaskans understand. The current system is not working. That's what I know. And that's what comes up over and over, is the idea that, why did we change our system, Lesil, again? And I say, oh, well, it's a suite of Scalia decisions. Citizens United, the Democratic Party of California. And they say, and why did the legislature, oh, well, okay. And then I say, bottom line, if we want to get back our voice, if we want to get back to a place where we can see the money that's going into these elections, and if we have a chance to be able to vote, some people want to vote for a Democrat, some people want to vote for a Republican. They don't want to be limited. So,
Brett and Leighan, you both made points about complexity in your arguments. Would you like to respond to the question about
Go ahead,
whether or
take it
not
first,
Alaskan
Leighan.
voters will make sense of this?
Absolutely, yes. I'd actually like to start with a quote from 2013 from Senator McGuire. It reads, "When people go into the ballot booths, it's not clear that voters always understand what they're voting on, to be honest. Voters don't always understand what they're voting on," in her words. And this ballot measure is extremely convoluted, it's complicated, there are contradictions built into it. And it was difficult for me to read just being trained and Googling essentially how to read a ballot measure. And then the next quote that was issued the day afterwards actually helps prove my point that this measure is too difficult and it's too complicated and it's too long. This is also from 2013. "The Citizens Initiative was misrepresented on the ballot, and that may have caused voters to make a decision they otherwise would not have made." So if this ballot measure was represented correctly, I don't believe voters would be voting for it. I believe people would be supporting my position and would be opposing this and voting no on this ballot measure because it is so complicated. It's 25 pages, it's 74 sections. It doesn't make sense to the average Alaskan.
I'd just add, one of the question was how do you plan on overcoming the natural thing for people not to want to change? So currently, one of their plans of overcoming it is $5 million of advertising, short clips, little pieces, catchy slogans, but none of the meat of the measure. I'm not hearing the meat of the measure. So I believe that Alaskans understand the system that we have and that we're blaming Alaskan voters and we're separating Alaskans. We're all Alaskans. If somebody chooses to affiliate as a Republican or a Democrat, that doesn't make them a demon. That makes them Alaskan that's chosen to affiliate. If it's an Alaskan that hasn't chosen to affiliate, that's just fine too. We're pretty proud of our opinions in Alaska and we respect the opinion of our neighbors. Trying to homogenize this process, I think is going to make it difficult even for 5 million to get it over the finish line. Thank you for the question.
I think the issue there, though, Brett, and what you're saying is that if you want to look at Alaskans being able to continue to identify and align with the party of their choice and still be allowed to move forward into an election process where they get that choice, and then the other Alaskans who choose to not identify with or to identify with the Alaskan Independence Party, for example, what system better gives the majority of Alaskans an opportunity? Not just the ones with the loudest, strongest voices in aligning in a political party, but the majority of Alaskans. And that's what I'm really trying to say here is that things are complex. Any change is complex. Have dealt with this in the legislature when I served, and I trust Alaskans. I think Alaskans are smarter and underestimated. I no doubt said that clearly there are times people go into the ballot booth, but what I know right now is that Alaskans who want to vote for the individual and go in and select an individual over here on one ballot and another cannot. And the system is being gamed. It's working against cooperative across the aisle work, and it's working against Alaskans. So that's my only, I see the idea that you're going for. I like and I understand the idea that Alaskans should be able to be loud and proud and strong. They still can be. And when Alaskans that are listening, if you are very partisan and you want to vote Democrat, you want to vote Republican, those parties will continue to exist. They will endorse candidates, and their R&D will exist. You get to vote for them.
But only if you ask for that affiliation to be included. In fact, what you propose is no affiliations in the primary through this measure. And then a person can petition to have their affiliation added to their name. And I see nothing from this measure that would prevent me from running in a Democratic district as a Republican and petitioning to have the D beside my name. Nothing prevents that in this measure.
Then you're not reading election laws in their totality. You actually can't be a Republican and run as a Democrat, nor a Democrat and run as a Republican. What changed in the Alaska Democratic Party case was you could be a U or an N and run as a D. There are other statutes that require you to run as what you are. Can I choose to run as a U? I can. Can I choose to run as an N? I can. That's what new. But if I'm a Republican, I appear on the ballot as a Republican. If I'm a Democrat, I appear on the ballot as a Democrat.
But not on the primary ballot that you're proposing. The
No,
primary ballot you're proposing removes
once again,
all of those things
Brett,
unless
you
petition.
haven't actually read all the statutes, because there are statutes that require candidates who affiliate with a party to be registered. That was the statute that was overcome in the Alaska Democratic Party case. So that statute's on the
Kendall,
books.
it's complete.
Now, just if you're an AIP candidate or a Green candidate or a Libertarian or a U or an N, now you'll have the absolute right to go show up on the ballot that way. Right now, there's games playing.
Scott, let's give.
I would actually like to jump in at this point. I'm going to quote from section 22 of your ballot measure. So this is where you would like to change. You would like to change our elections process and explanation of how people vote. A candidate's designated affiliation does not imply that the candidate is nominated or endorsed by the political party or group that the party or group approves of or associates with that candidate, but only that the candidate is registered as affiliated with the political party or political group. So hypothetically, Brett could register as a Democrat if he wanted to. He could run in a primary against me. I am a registered Democrat. I've been a progressive my whole life. Brett could run as a Democrat. Brett could beat me as a Democrat. And then Brett could change his party affiliation again,
That's
right?
actually-
Isn't that in here?
That's not what that language
Okay, well,
says.
Brett could run as a Democrat
Let's
and
give him
not
a chance
actually
to
get...
respond. You
Sure.
quoted the ballot
to-
language.
yeah.
You asked a question. Let's give him a chance to respond.
So that language, it's interesting you read that language that way, because that's pretty tortured. What that says is
It's tough
a
language.
candidate can run as a Democrat. They can run as a Republican. But that's not the official party's position. That's what that language says. So what it does is that language is actually in preservation of the party's free speech and association rights. So the Democratic Party can get together and they can say, okay, there's two Democratic candidates, for example. Two Democratic candidates in this district got through the top 4 primary, and the Alaska Democratic Party or the Democratic Party of that district says, but this person's our candidate. And so that disclaimer is required in order to honor the free speech rights and associational rights of the party. It does not anywhere in there say, you can be a Republican and run as a Democrat. It actually says quite the opposite. It says
that's not
when
how
someone's
I read it.
affiliated
I
with
mean,
a
that
party
might have been how you
and
wrote
runs
and
affiliated with
intended.
that party, they are not necessarily the official endorsed
But if
candidate
I am
of the party.
endorsed by my local Democratic Party and I'm running against Brett, who is registered as a Democrat and running as a Democrat, and Brett beats me because Brett has $5 million of outside spending, for example, like what you have. But if Brett campaigns as a better Democrat than I am, even though he doesn't really affiliate with those stances that we take as Democrats in Alaska, he could beat me. I could be the endorsed candidate, but that doesn't matter.
I would actually pose a question back. In the status quo, Brett could register as a Democrat, run against you, outspend you, and defeat you, and be the Democratic candidate. We've had many candidates of both parties that actually the parties didn't support.
Oh, like
Brett, you've been trying to get a
Brett,
word
I'll
in here.
let
I'm
you-
going to give you a chance.
Like,
I guess
hold
instead
that.
of going through the back and forth, because we can, but
Yes.
what it's clearly shown is that you're right, I'm not an attorney. I've been involved in the legislative process. I can read for about 35 years. I've taken a look at this ballot initiative. I'm telling you, just from what you've heard today, Alaskans, if the person that wrote it has to argue against somebody that's been in the business and somebody that's currently in the business of what the words mean, how in the world can we expect Alaskans to understand what this really does from a 3-paragraph summary when we have 25 pages?
What I
legislation?
understand is that Alaskans broadly know that the system we have right now is not working. That's what I know. And I encourage every Alaskan watching this, take your weekend, take an evening, have me come over, have Scott come over, reach out to us if you need us to walk through it. I promise you it's a good use of your time because the system we have is not working.
Let's go back to our panel. James, you've been patient. Go ahead.
Steve, to follow up on what Senator McGuire was saying, you said that Alaskans feel that the system is broken, isn't working. How do they know, though, that this 3-part proposal is the solution that works? How do they know that it won't be worse? Because my understanding is that these 3 parts, as they're linked together, have not been implemented anywhere else in the country. I know Brett Huber had mentioned ranked choice voting in other states, but that didn't involve all these pieces that are in place here.
I think that's a great question. There's no question. I love this about this ballot measure. I love this about Alaska. Often we are putting together unique and leading edge solutions based on the kind of people we are. Each of them separately have been used and tried in different jurisdictions with success. So there's that. But if you really look at the first two, just as an example, opening up the primary and returning it back to the way that Alaskans are more used to. The old timers, before these decisions came down, that's the way it used to be. In fact, I've heard so much criticism since it first came in the 2000s, people that went to vote for me that were confused and then had to reveal with their neighbors standing behind them, well, I don't know what ballot I guess I have to take. So I think the first part of it, returning to an open system itself, is fairly easy to understand. It has been tried, it's been tried here. When it comes to the dark money, that is also, I think, fairly easy to understand. It's been happening all across the United States as a result of Citizens United. We're going one layer farther and we're saying, not only does it have to be disclosed who's giving, but who's giving to that. And we're experimenting with that with success in our ballot measure and the funding raised for that. As far as the third and the ranked choice voting, I actually think our solution is superior. We'll find out. I don't think it will be a big stretch to say that we've eliminated the problems that have been there with ranked choice voting. There are only a couple. There's a concern about people wanting to affiliate when they can't, and there's a concern in the area where people have to vote for and rank when they choose not to. But ranked choice voting isn't some, completely unknown equation to measure a voter outcome. It's been tried, and it was tried in the progressive era for many, many years. And it's being brought back in this last decade with success at local levels and state levels. And I think really the point is that if you listen right, what you hear are scare tactics. Because when people are in power, they like that power. Political parties like the way it works, and dark money interests like the way it works.
Well, Steve, could I follow up
Yeah,
real quick?
I tell you what, I do want to give the con side a chance to answer, but if you have a brief follow-up, I'll let you ask it for the pro side, and then we'll turn it back to you.
Just a word that you had mentioned there was experiment. Why not allow another state to take the first step and then do something like this and then see how it works?
Other states have. I think the point is, in the years that I served, we did this often. You look to, frankly, as lawyers, you're looking for persuasive argument more than binding, because often in a state of only 54 years, you don't have a binding argument, right? It's not that it is an experiment. All three of these things have been tried. It's the question that you had, putting them together in one place. Other states have tried it. Other communities have tried it. When you look at mayors, it's interesting, the statistics she brought up, and we'll talk about it later, but way more women elected as mayors under the ranked choice voting.
Let's give the con side a chance. So the original question had to do with the combination of these three different elements and whether there's a unique risk.
I think it's a great question, James. I think that you hit it right on the head. It's never been done before. We know that we have an election process that works. The election works. We know that we pick candidates that sometimes win by one vote. We have an independent Speaker of the House presiding over a bipartisan House that didn't even win by one vote. He won by a coin toss, because after they counted it three times, it was a dead heat. Right? So people aren't complaining about voting. People aren't blaming it on themselves. I think this is, again, talking about politics and not people. People understand how to go vote. They would like to see better results from their politicians once they get there and work. It's not the people's fault. Let's not put a system in place where all you have to do is stand and smile in the corner and not stand for anything to get to office, and then wonder who's going to hold your feet to the fire. I just think taking that big a risk, James, with something as important as the leadership of Alaska and the issues that we have chasing, rolling those dice, not a good call.
And I'll follow up on your follow-up question on the experiment, because this was a bit confusing for me as well, that we've got outside experts and advocates and people from all over the country weighing in on why it's so important for Alaska to push all three of these pieces of the measure and to really experiment with something. Catherine Gell, who's an heiress out of Wisconsin, who's been used a lot by their campaign to really promote this, she really just wants to turn politics into a business at the expense of Alaskan voters, and she wants to make Alaska a guinea pig because it's so cheap. It's so cheap to buy an election here. They're spending $5 million. Maybe after this debate, it'll be 10, who knows? But it's cheap for outside billionaires to buy this type of system, to buy these types of candidates that will benefit them. And I want to quote Catherine Gell at the Commonwealth, or one of the presentations she gave, Commonwealth North. Thank you. Sorry, there's so many that we're doing. But independents run and win in Alaska, which is highly unusual in other states. It shows our truly independent nature in Alaska. It shows our truly Alaskan nature, that we don't really buy into the party nonsense. We don't let political parties bully us around. We don't let political parties take charge. When Jason Grenn ran as an independent the first time, he won. Now, for the second time, he lost. So why is somebody who couldn't win an election because he couldn't convince his neighbors that he was electable, pushing for these types of electoral changes?
So I do want to make sure that we make good use of our panelists. So Tom, I'd like to throw it back to you and ask the debaters to whom the questions are posed to keep your answers brief so we have a chance to make sure that they get the opportunity to ask the questions they want to ask. Go ahead, Tom.
All right, this one's primarily for the con side. In opposing the measure, you and your supporters who write me op-eds and letters to the editor have talked about folks having their ballots thrown out if they only vote for one candidate. How is that meaningfully different from our current system in which any vote for a candidate other than the one who ends up the winner is similarly discarded?
That's a great question, Tom, and easy to answer. Under our current system, everybody gets one vote. It's counted once. The person with the most votes wins. Under this new scheme, some people may vote once, some people may choose 4, some people may choose 2, some people might not feel compelled to vote or rank somebody that's completely opposed on their key issue, and you're going to end up with votes that don't count. Everybody gets to vote once, but that one vote matters in our current system. In that current system, you can win the first election. I have a slide 2 that I'm referring to you can take a look at. You can win that current election. You can win round 2 of that current election. And then when you get to the third round, you can still be upset. So if I voted for the winning candidate, my second choice vote never counts. The 3 that picked the 3 lowest vote getting candidates get a second and third bite at the apple. It's just not fair. It takes the surety of one vote being counted and the winner wins, and turns it into your vote may be counted, it may not be counted, it may be counted in 3, it might be counted in 1, and the winner is really an amalgamation of multiple rounds of the least objectionable candidate instead of the person that was able to convince the most people in their district that they're the best person to represent them.
And
it's a huge problem.
I'll add to that. In our current system, we have one person, one vote. So I know for a fact that if I'm going to be voting for candidate A, and Brett's going to be voting for candidate B, I know we automatically cancel each other out. But in this other system, I have to find this way to game the bubbles, to figure out who I want to win. Do I want the third place person to come in first after I do this tabulation? It's confusing, it's complicated. It takes away our right that our one vote counts as one choice.
Turn it over to the pro side just for the opportunity to answer that question about whether or not there will be people whose votes are excluded because they chose not to rank all of the candidates and perhaps their first choice did not.
But wait, that wasn't the question, actually.
The question itself, as stated, was that the folks who don't want this measure to pass have talked about folks having their ballots thrown out if they only vote for one candidate. And how is that meaningfully different from our current system in which any vote from a candidate other than the winner, any vote for a candidate other than the winner is similarly discarded?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and Tom, you make an excellent point, and that's exactly the problem. So right now, a race with 3 candidates, if I chose the person in third place, my vote does not meaningfully count towards the outcome. I think that's the phenomenon you're referring to. This measure treats all voters the same. It's been, again, approved by Trump-appointed judges, Obama-appointed judges, Bush-appointed judges, all say this does not violate one person, one vote, because everyone has equal opportunity to express their preferences. And if they choose not to express a second preference, that is, of course, their choice. Just like in many ballots, I've been involved in many elections, and I've seen the ballots where voters skip the race. They don't vote. That's always a voter's choice. However, when you're talking about games, it's interesting that they say games can be played. The only game that can be played is we're going to require candidates to at least convince 50% plus 1 that they're the right choice. In the current system, I live in a swing district. It's been Democrat, Republican, Independent. It goes back and forth. I know to a scientific certainty I'm a Republican. If I went and ran against a Democrat, I could go across the street and ask my neighbor to run as an independent. Put your name on the ballot, don't campaign, don't do a darn thing, just get your name on the ballot as an independent. I'll win the race. The independent votes will slide off of the Democrat. If I'm a Republican, or if I'm a Democrat running against a Republican, I can coax someone and say, hey, as a goof, just go register as a Libertarian and run. They're going to carve 7 or 8 points off the Republican. I'm going to go win with 43%. You want to talk about games. Games are the current system. Games are the current system where third-party candidates spoil election outcomes, where parties swap candidates in at the last minute. No more games. Candidates should show up at the ballot, say what they affiliate. They can affiliate as a U, an N, an AIP, a Democrat, or Republican. The top 4 go on. And then you attempt to convince 50% plus 1 of your constituents that you're the right person for the job. There's no gaming the system. The system is engineered to show the preference of the voters. Frankly, if the parties can't produce a candidate that can convince 50% plus 1 of their constituents that they're the right choice, then maybe they have no business running.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to give Brett the opportunity.
Oftentimes, candidates get to 50 plus 1 in our current election, Scott, but if you set up a system where there's going to be 4 candidates in any general election, that makes it more difficult to get to a majority of the vote. Not less difficult. You have 100% divided 4 ways. That's about 25% apiece. So you're saying that you have to get to 50%, but truly, I can get to 46% and still lose, even though my competitors had much less. If they're willing to work together and call each other's second place choice, my 46% stays at 46%. They get to the contrived majority. And Alaskans in that district have been fooled and have found that they selected an individual, not me, perhaps it's Lesil, that's going to best represent them. 46% of the vote, not good enough. Now, everybody that voted for her liked her so much they voted for just Lesil. Everybody else voted for each other. Liesel's going to lose 54%. One of the 3 that didn't get enough votes is going to win. I just can't understand how that can be not gaming a system. Thank you.
So if I could briefly respond.
Very quickly, please. We have one more question I want to get to.
So Brett just described a very interesting situation where 54% of his constituents preferred to someone else. That sounds like an optimal outcome. If you had 2 candidates and one was a spoiler to the other, but collectively it's clear 54% preferred someone other than Mr. Huber, that's an ideal outcome under the system. And again, we don't go to the car lot and expect to choose from a beige sedan and a gray sedan. That's Soviet Russia. We expect to be able to go to the car lot and pick anything. We go to the restaurant, we expect the whole menu to be open. That's what Alaskans want. They want more choices. If you object to their choices, that's tough luck because 50% plus 1 rules the day.
James, let's go back to you for what we hope is the last question.
This one is for Brett Huber specifically. It's in regard to something that Mr. Kendall had said.
Sure.
Obviously, money has been talked about a lot this evening, and we know where the money for the pro side is coming from because they say they're following the rules that would be in place, so we can trace it back to the individual donors.
So the rules don't apply to ballot measures at all, but go ahead.
And then, but he had mentioned the Republican State Leadership Committee, which has donated to the anti-cause on this.
They have.
That's where their money is, where that money is coming from isn't listed right now. Can you say where that is coming from?
Certainly, it actually is. We've complied with all the APOC reports. So what you see is when you have a group that participates in an election, you file a form that shows who the leadership of their group is, right? They're a group. You can Google them. You can see who participates. You can see who the chairman is. You can see where the dollars came from. We're filing all of that material.
I can't see it like I can for them.
Well, it's a lot easier for me to show you every individual that's part of a group of 1 if I'm a billionaire that can set up a front organization to just accept my money. But the United States Chamber of Commerce, if they participate in this race, everybody that participates in the Chamber of Commerce that's made more than $2,000 should show up in an APOC report in Alaska. It's absurd. I mean, it doesn't provide more clarity. It provides more cloud screen. If it was up to me, we would register every single campaign contribution that comes in the state from this point forward. We'd make it available for Alaskans to see, and we would require candidates to spend money to post it. I believe every Alaskan has the right. This falls short even on that issue most Alaskans agree on.
I'll give the pro side a chance to respond to anything that they want on that question.
No, I think Mr. Brooks raised an excellent point. You know, we've chosen to disclose and over disclose, and we have to show the entity that actually writes the check on our disclaimers because that's what's required by APOC. We've gone the extra mile because we know the games that are played. The RSLC, other national organizations, what really happens is it's pay to play. A wealthy donor goes to them with a check for $50,000 and said, I'd sure like this to show up in Alaska. They don't give hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars out of the kindness of their heart. There are donors behind these dollars. They won't reveal them. We've got to do better than that. This won't fix the problem for ballot measures. This attacks the problem with respect to candidates, but we've got to start somewhere. We've got to do better. Citizens United turned our election disclosure system upside down, and this is kind of the first step on the way back to taking our elections back.
I wanted to counter that because this line of questioning that only is directed towards Brett's group really neglects Protect Our Elections, which was the first opposition group that was organized to oppose Proposition 2. And just because we're volunteer and we're grassroots and we're women who are working multiple jobs doesn't mean that Scott Kendall gets to ignore us and gets to beat up on our opposition generally because he doesn't think we're worthy of you know, even being listed or named as an opposition. It's really unfair when, you know, $5 billion can buy your way to silence the voices of women in Alaska.
Yeah, I just want to correct one
Sure.
factual error, if I could, James. It goes straight to the question. Earlier in the debate, Mr. Kendall said that the majority of my group's money comes from outside Alaska, and that's just not true, nor it will ever be true in this election. It's too important. This is an Alaskan issue. Are we looking to help for some major groups that can help combat $5 million of advertising that sounds good and tells you nothing? Absolutely. But the majority of our money is coming from Alaskans. It will continue to come from Alaskans. Look at our APOC reports. There's another one due the end of the week. Check the facts.
On that point, I think we're going to close our exchange portion of the debate. I appreciate the comments from both of the pro and the con sides, as well as the questions posed by our journalist. We're going to move now to the third phase of the debate, where we'll give each of our sides a chance to close their argument in their summary speech. This is a 4-minute speech during which they have the opportunity to wrap up their arguments, address any of the outstanding issues they believe are still present in the debate, and make their final appeal to you, the voter, about whether or not you should support or oppose this ballot measure. I want to remind you that we're going to ask the con side to go first, again, because the pro side is proposing this change to the status quo, this difference in how things would be operated in Alaska's ballot. We give them the chance to both open the debate, proposing their suggested solution, and to close the debate to make their final appeal. So at this point now, I'd like to turn it over to our con side and ask them to provide their 4-minute summary speech in defense of their position.
Thank you. Yep, thank you. Thanks again, Steve. And again, thanks to everybody that's here. The idea is to educate Alaskans about this important issue, and I appreciate all of you that are listening. So the proponents of this measure talk about politics. They don't talk about people. My group, Defend Alaska Elections, is comprised of Alaskans from around the state. Every political stripe, color, background, income level is fighting to ensure Alaskans, not outside billionaires, are selecting our leaders. The proponents of this measure have invented a problem and offer a solution that's proven in other locales does not work, and in fact, makes things worse. History is often the best predictor of future events. While I was working for you, Senator McGuire, I heard you say that many times. Let's take a look at the Alaska election history. 1978, Dick Randolph, first Libertarian candidate to win statewide office in the United States. 1990, Wally Hickel wins as an Alaska Independent. 2007 through 13, Alaska Senate's governed by a bipartisan majority caucus. 9 Democrats, 6 Republicans. 2010, Lisa Murkowski won a write-in campaign over both Republican and Democratic contenders. 2014, Independent Bill Walker was elected as governor on the Unity ticket. Alaska's House is currently governed by a bipartisan majority and led by an independent speaker. The idea that we can't put people that we select in office and we need some kind of new scheme just doesn't hold water to me. Now let's look at San Francisco for a moment. Again, history. In March 2002, San Francisco voters adopted ranked choice voting. It's been used in every election since 2004. Since 2004, property crime in San Francisco is up 17%. San Francisco now has the highest property crime rate of any city in California and one of the highest in the United States. Since 2007, the homeless population in San Francisco has nearly doubled from 5,700 to 10,000 people. Drug overdose deaths are up 62% since 2006. Property crime, homelessness, drugs have significantly increased since ranked choice voting would go into effect. Would anybody say the residents in San Francisco are better off today than they were 16 years ago? Is ranked choice voting the panacea that the proponents claim? Certainly not. Ballot Measure 2 is an experiment. Never before has any state made this sweeping change to how they conduct elections. James, you're absolutely right. Alaskan elections are working. We know we have a fair and transparent process. It's easy to understand. 2 sentences to tell you how to vote. 19 pages in Maine for the instruction manual on ranked choice voting. We know that we have a fair and transparent process. It's easy to understand. We don't always like the outcome, but we accept it and we move on. That's what Senator Begich did. That's what Governor Parnell did. These two disagree on many issues, but I believe they both have shown through their careers in and out of office that they care deeply about our state. They both won and lost elections for 2 of the highest offices in the state. They both adamantly oppose this crazy scheme and believe Alaskans should control our own destiny, not moneyed interests from outside our state. Alaskans, be ready. These billionaires don't like to lose. Expect endless ads with buzzwords and no content. Expect every election trick money can buy. More fake Facebook, more misleading voters, more false polling information, more obfuscation, more of the same. I have faith in Alaskans. I know you'll see through this ruse. If you can't be assured that this new untested scheme will be better than we have, it's incumbent upon you to vote no. The burden of proof is on them. They've not come close to meeting it. Alaskans have big issues ahead. We need champions in state office and not a race to mediocrity. We need men and women of vision that represent our values and work through the issues ahead. Alaskans deserve no less. In closing, contrary to the proponents' poll-tested slogan, as Alaskan voters, this measure would clearly limit your choice, silence many of your voices, and provide our state with poorer results. John Coghill, also a no vote on Ballot Measure 2. Thank you. I appreciate the time, and I appreciate everybody's participation.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank the University of Alaska Anchorage. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ms. Gonzales, and sorry that you've been left out of the conversation. I came in late to the situation here, and apologies for that happening. And thank you, Mr. Huber. This has been a great debate tonight, and I hope for the families out there watching, this is an example of how you debate in a civilized community. Many of us here have known each other our whole childhood and will agree and disagree civilly, and that's a beautiful thing about living here in Alaska. What I think this debate boils down to, lots of arguments have been made tonight. It's whether or not you believe your voice counts under our current system. Whether or not you think that the candidates that you get a chance to vote for are answerable to you without barriers and with free and open dialogue, or whether you believe that there is a problem in that. I personally believe there is, and I've experienced it firsthand. I think that when you set up a partisan system, a duopoly the way we have with a closed primary, what ends up happening is that the candidates end up running for the party. And what happens is they then become fearful that if they don't fit through the eye of the needle, as Scott said earlier, in the decision making that they have, the real problems that are facing the state, they're afraid they won't get the endorsement of that party or the money from that party. So they begin to lead in a way that moves away from the majority of Alaskans and toward the political party itself. That's the reality. Add the dark money to it with Citizens United, you have massive spending coming in a small state like this. It's ironic to me that the opposition continues to bring up billionaires and what I would call influence from outside. That's exactly what this ballot measure is trying to prohibit. At a minimum, to make it more difficult for it to exist in the dark, that light comes in, Alaskans have the right to know and talk about it. If you think that your voice counts, if you think that there are not barriers to you electing the people you want, then you want to keep the current system. If you think that we are on the wrong path, if you've experienced as a voter a feeling like something just isn't right, why are these the only two choices? Why don't I have more choices? And how come they're making decisions once they go to Juneau that don't seem like they're really representative of the majority of my community. If you think that's happening, then you should vote for Ballot Measure 2. I think Alaska has gone away from its compass, its true north. We've been built on the backs of pioneering men and women who certainly didn't walk up and offer to build a road project or help a neighbor out with a garden or a homestead and say, what's your political party? We've moved away for it. Ballot Measure 2 won't solve all the answers, but I promise you it's better than what we have. And it is a great start. All three of the things that are in Ballot Measure 2 have been tried and tested in different jurisdictions. The fact that we're bringing them together for all of you is an opportunity moving forward. This November, we're going to face a choice. The choice is whether or not we trust that when someone is elected to office, that they will represent the whole community and not individual special interests hidden in the dark, and not party officials who meet and decide and vote without you being in the room. If you still want to vote for a party and a partisan person, the political party can endorse it and you'll have that information. But gone will be the days where you have to stand and select one ballot or the other. I thank you for our time tonight and ask you to vote yes on Ballot Measure 2.
So there you have it, the arguments for and against Ballot Measure 2, which is going to appear on our November 3rd ballot. I hope this discussion has helped you come to some resolution about what your feelings are. And I particularly want to express my appreciation to a number of groups who made this event possible. First, to the Anchorage Daily News for their support of informed dialogue that's relevant to all Alaskans. I also want to say my thanks to the Atwood Foundation and the North Rim Bank for their sponsorship of the Great Land Debate Fund, which is an effort to support debate education and public dialogue events that benefit Alaskans young and old. I want to say thanks to the UAA Votes project, which is organized by the University of Alaska Anchorage's Department of Student Life and Leadership. And most importantly, I want to thank the participants of tonight's debate, the pro-side debaters and the con-side debaters, as well as our guests from the Anchorage Daily News, for helping us all understand this issue a little bit more effectively. Remember, at the end of these debates, I always say that they aren't the conclusion of a conversation, but ideally the beginning of one. Continue to talk with your friends and family, with your neighbors and coworkers, so that we can all come to a better understanding of what the future of our state should look like. Thanks, everyone.